You wanna know something funny? Last year I was already planning to play and review this game, but because I never made a video on the first game, I thought it'd be best to do that first, then move on to the sequel. But as my track record for last year can show, this never came around to happen. Now, almost a year later, here we are, finally looking at Prototype 2. It's real funny to me taking a look back at the 7th gen of consoles, because while this was the generation where the military shooters peaked, it is also the generation of countless overlooked games. And entering the 2010s is when developers wanted to get out of their edgy phase. Sadly, gamers were not too keen on leaving it just yet, as Modern Warfare 3 was about to break all sorts of records. I mention all of this because it sadly played one of the many factors into why Prototype 2 sadly marked the end of its development studio. But what about the game itself? To say it was divisive back then is an understatement. It had a lot to live up to after everyone loved the edginess of the first game, but how much of it was warranted and how much of this game truly stands on its own, that's what we are here to find out. Prototype 2 puts us behind the serrated claws of Sergeant James Heller, a US Marine coming home from Iraq, just in time to find out New York has been infected with the Black Lake virus one more time, and by the time he gets home, the infection has gotten bad enough that his wife and daughter are dead. So, struck with suicidal grief, Heller decides to enlist into the Red Zone in hopes of finding Alex Mercer and kill him in his revenge, as it's believed he caused the infection. And he does get his wish, but at a price. Mercer infects him after seeing his resilience in spite of being a mere human. So now, having become a biomass creature just like Mercer, Heller has to use his powers to investigate the infection and kill everyone responsible for it. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Much like the previous game, the story is not overly complicated, but the bigger difference of course being that Heller is well aware of who he is and he knows exactly what he wants. And fitting for a sequel, Heller's superpowers are a big expansion from Alex's in the previous game. Much like in the previous game, the core of the gameplay and helping Heller against his family comes in the form of chaos. But this time around, the chaos has a bit more personality. Since this time around the military has experience dealing with the virus, everything is more organized, and adding the complication that Heller has to deal with a new type of enemy. More on that in a moment. One of the things that got expanded for Heller is that he can wield two different powers at the same time. The idea is making the combat a lot more dynamic by letting you mix and match according to your own needs. And this in turn gives you a combat system where you can chain combos or have a more practical build that alternate between fast combos and heavy hitting attacks, or mixing up close quarters with ranged combat. The only real limit being how many powers you unlocked, and of course, your own imagination. Since Heller is an experienced soldier, a lot of his moves and his aggression reflect that. Unlike Alex, Heller can perform finishers on enemy vehicles, meaning if you want to, you can just one-shot everything once you unlock that ability. You can make things more interesting and even tear off turrets and missile launchers out of tanks and helicopters and turn it against them. The best part is that if you want to, you can do it in the most spectacular ways possible. I see comments over the years criticizing this as it makes the game too easy. I disagree. I love these options because what they do is give you a little combat sandbox where, if you know what you are doing, you can make an absolute spectacle out of your battles. You can find the good old-fashioned way. You can use weapons, you can jump from vehicle to vehicle using finishers, which by the way have their own unique animation depending on what powers you got equipped. It's just pure unadulterated fun. And this is just the military side. On the infected side, developers realized oversized hunters being your only enemy did not make for the most memorable faction. So instead, hunters got overhauled into multiple different classes, all of them using a variation of Heller's own powers, and all of them deadly in their own way. I like these hunters a lot better because this time around I feel like I am actually having a fair fight. If I get beaten up or die, I can finally say it is because of my own mistakes and not because the hunters are being super cheap and sucker punching me or getting iframes like the ones in the previous game did. I guess developers realize this too, because among Heller's arsenal, there is a shield. You can use it to defend yourself if things are getting overwhelming, but if you time it at the right moment, you perform a parry that stunts bigger enemies, and it even deflects missiles back to whoever shot you with, adding yet another layer to the combat. And you do need it, because both the military and the infected have boosted their ranks with tougher enemies that can tag your combos, and will then combo you back to back unless you know who to parry. For the military, there is of course the super soldiers. They get reintroduced fairly early in the game. They are big, they are angry, and they are often accompanied by a lot of armed soldiers, so you have a lot of sides of the battlefield to be aware of. But if you persevere, fighting these guys gets super fun, especially since you can take them straight to Suplex City. One detail I like about how the combat has evolved in this game is how you can strategize. You can get pelted by gunfire? Do crowd control with your tendrils. Brawlers are comboing you constantly? Grab stuff and throw it at them. Enemies are too grabby? Switch to powers that let you attack from a distance and vice versa. I know some of the systems were already in the first game, even with Mercer's slightly smaller arsenal, but playing through that game reminded me just how much I was getting destroyed because I wasn't using my powers wisely, sticking mostly to close quarter attacks because I thought those powers were cooler. Probably explains why so many players back then had problems with supposed difficulty spikes. It was all self-inflicted, but that was Mercer, so let's talk more about Heller. If you don't feel like going all out in a bombastic battle, you can be tactical about it. Stealth is another element that has been expanded upon, and I love it. I am a huge stealth junkie, not because of the mechanics of having to wait for nearsighted guards to get out of the way, but because of the game letting me mess with the guards in all sorts of ways, and then feel good because I got away with it. Heller can consume all sorts of biomass, and by that I mean he can eat humans and infected alike. Consuming humans lets you take the appearance of whoever you ate, and unless you are actively attacking military personnel, nobody will bother you. You can do the usual stuff, stealth consuming enemies until no one is left, or hijacking enemy vehicles, or you can be a little more cheeky. Most military bases, both inside and outside, have containers called the infected. You can create a distraction by consuming anyone with an access code and then unleash the beast and happily watch how they slaughter your problems away. You can either join the fight or take advantage of the chaos and sneak into your main objectives, or simply kill everyone while their guard is down. Later on, you unlock the Biobomb powers. It is just like its name implies. They work like portable tendrils. You grab an enemy, infect them with it, then throw your victim into whatever obstacle is in front of you, and then watch the destruction unfold. Perfect for clearing big targets if you don't feel like slashing at it or shooting at it with smaller weapons. The real fun way to use it, however, is with stealth. I don't know how much of this is intentional, but you can disguise yourself, sneak a biobomb into some poor unsuspecting schmuck, then the resultant real explosion will wipe out whatever poor souls were unlucky enough to be caught in its blast radius. And I love it because you can do it as many times as you want and it will never raise the sus meter on you. So if you happen to have a mission that requires you to destroy a target, but a side objective asks you to be stealthy, you can just spam those beautiful bombs. They are amazing. To add some extra variety and get more master of your disguises, the game has moments where you actually need to take part in military operations. There is the usual piloting military vehicles, of course, but then there is also being out in the field with other soldiers. Now they are more or less walking segments with some shooting as you are gathering intel on what you are really after, but there are some really small moments out of watching these soldiers having a honest to goodness conversation about what they're doing there. Best part is, since Blackwatch already has super soldiers on the loose, they don't find it weird at all to watch you jumping around or grabbing weapons and things that are supposed to be several times your weight. They're great segments, and they make for a nice breather from before you blow your disguise and get back to slaughtering these people. But that's enough about the main gameplay, let's talk about the open world for a bit. Most of the side content is now distributed into 4 different categories: Blacknet operations, which are essentially story-related side missions, field ops, hypes, and of course, the collectibles. The Blacknet operations, like I said, are more or less story-driven. There is a number of Blackwatch terminals scattered around the 3 zones, but only link to them is not enough. You need clearance to access the missions. You can stumble upon the soldier with the credentials you need, or the Blacknet itself can reveal who you need to consume, and then you can track them with your hunter abilities. Once you get to play the Blacknet operations, however, you get treated to a variety of missions and gameplay. Some of it, of course, is not too different from the story missions, but they carry enough personality and fun to be worth doing. It also helps this is one of the main ways you can upgrade your powers, so there's plenty of incentives to go out of your way to complete them. Field ops are just as their name indicate. It's a group of scientists and military escorts doing some research on the virus. Rather straightforward, you kill everyone whoever your sadistic heart wishes. They are very satisfying to do if you just want some quick kills. Hives are the infected version of the Black Death missions. There's a limited number of them, and each requires you to complete different objectives, usually involving killing or consuming a specific kind of infected. It is here where you can upgrade your main powers into their more deadly variants. With the exception of the Black Death missions, everything else you actually have to look for yourself. Luckily, the game gives you 2 ways to pinpoint where the side content is. There are sonar signals in the map screen, and if you are in the vicinity of something, the game will notify you and you'll be playing a small game of hot potato. I will say I like the side content in this game, if anything because much like with the story itself, it has a lot more personality to it. It's not just, hey, you got a collectible. It actually reveals you how things in New York got the way they did, and in turn give you more incentive to explore the map, and my goodness, do I love the overworld in this game. Despite the virus ravaging the city for a second time, this place feels more alive than ever. It's not the stuff of legends, but each zone has its own personality and tells its own story. The Yellow Zone is full of quarantine areas where people have been displaced from their homes. You can see people trying to make the most of it, or you can see military personnel doing their job, or abusing them. Most military bases have protesters calling out Bloodwatch and demanding they leave. You can see people in the streets just vibing and enjoying life as much as possible in the less infected streets or in the green zone. And you can try, and likely fail, to have a stroll in the zombie-ridden red zone, but if you go to a safe place, you can actually witness a spectacle of the military fighting it out against the infected. If there is one word I can use to describe this game, it's personality. While the first game was a fun and serious, if a little campy, edgy superhero story, Prototype 2 is leaning more on the campier side. All the characters from Blackwatch are embracing the cartoonist side of their villainy, to Alex Mercer being an absolute edgelord. I know at the time some people were not amused by this and they wanted the story to continue taking itself seriously, but for me, this was amusing and very refreshing. And when your game has this much self-aware personality that is actively expanding on gameplay and story, it only makes sense to introduce and answer a very fun question. What if James Heller and Alex Mercer were not the only biomass shape-shifting monsters? The Evolved are the answer to that. For one reason or another, Mercer infected plenty of people besides Heller to infiltrate the military and to also induct them into his edgelord cult. Every Evolved you find carries some of those sweet upgrades, and also make for the closest thing you get to facing someone who is equipped with almost the same superpowers as you. They shake up the dynamic quite nicely too. Sometimes you will have story missions where you are hunting down someone who you already know is an Evolved. Some other times, a target will surprise you and reveal they are Evolved themselves, and because they carry similar powers as you, it means you actually have to go out of your way to mix and match your own powers so you have a fighting chance against them, even using all of the skills you've been picking up along the way. They are very entertaining. Yes, they are edgelords, they all want to talk trash and some big game towards Heller, and it's all the more amusing because Heller has something to say back at them. But that's not to say there's not anything interesting going on behind all that cheese. Yeah, the characters are a lot more self-aware on their own personalities, but there is also more layers to them. They're not just edgelords and angry military men having some grand conspiracy going on. This time around you can see more decent people than in the first game. For all of his anger and grief over losing his family and his lack of patience towards people trying to drag him into some world-shattering stakes, he is also very perceptive. He knows when it's time to be angry and when to be compassionate. Since he is a veteran soldier, he also knows when it's time to play smart and play up his disguise, and also when it is time to be violent. But that's not to say there is no flaws with the story and the writing. Mercer's role in the story was the most divisive aspect for a very good reason. Marketing was not subtle at all, that he will be the antagonist this time around, and you pretty much see it coming from the minute he starts speaking. For many, this was a complete 180 from the rather heroic way the first game ended, and that's because they released a comic detailing what happened between both games. Yeah, let's just say the comic is not a happy one, and the full context behind why Alex is now the antagonist is just... it's a little petty and dumb to even enjoy in a campy way, so I can see why some were not happy with this game at all. Even with those flaws, and even if the gameplay feels easier, I ended up loving this game, so much so that even after getting the footage I needed, I went out of my way to get all the achievements. I went into New Game Plus and I even cranked up the difficulty to its hardest, and I was still having the time of my life. The challenge was still there, and not needing to do the collectibles anymore left me with plenty of time to enjoy the combat in its truest form. I know a number of fans and critics thought this game was a lot easier than the first, maybe too easy, but I will make the argument that is because we were all coming from the first game having a learning curve that felt like a difficulty spike. Combine that experience with a more lenient gameplay system that lets you be more intuitive, and you get a game that feels like it's not as hard as the previous one. Other than a PC-related glitch where a scripted tutorial breaks and makes a mission unbeatable, unless you do some risky things to your computer or simply reload a checkpoint until the script fixes itself, I really don't have much complaints about this game. It does have the inevitable open world effect where you eventually get tired of playing the closer you are to 100% completion, but for me that's just part of the journey, just gotta roll with the punches. That's why I am more than happy to give Prototype 2 a very fun and well-deserved 8 out of 10. This is a very underrated game. It sucks that it was so polarizing and divided the fanbase, and it sucks even more it came at a time where the Call of Duty bubble was at such a peak that it cannibalized the sales for this game and effectively killed its developer. I can only imagine how amazing it would have been if this game came out today, when superhero games have become more common and normalized, when superpowers and wrecking your enemies like it's nothing is just as fun as ever. It would have been amazing to see proper remasters if not downright remakes of both games, but sadly, like Mirror's Edge over at EA, they were quite ahead of their time. Besides, I don't think Activision is in any hurry to try and make superhero games like this, not when they're trying not to fall apart from the lawsuits over employee abuse or making sure the deal with Microsoft doesn't fall through, as every regulatory entity in the world is trying to block their acquisition from happening, and of course, the fact that in spite of everything, they are too busy printing money with the military war machine.